So that podcast thing.
Let's pretend to do a show or something. If they want to listen, we'll put it out there.
All right, here we go. Today is June 22nd, 2015, the day after Father's Day. And this is episode 120 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as almost always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, Jerry, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. I picked up a nasty souvenir for my trip, though. I think I got the flu. I've been fighting the flu for a week, but I'm almost over it. But if I sound a little off or I have to mute suddenly because I'm coughing, I apologize.
Told you not to play with the polar bears like that.
Well, you know, they're just so darn cute.
They are.
How was your Father's Day?
Oh, it was excellent. Went over and hung out with the parents, and sent off one of the kids to camp for a week. So that's always good.
Did the kid know that he was being sent off, or did you surprise him with his sudden exile?
It was a surprise. Surprise!
Don't leave us with the baby.
All right. So, starting off the show, I'll remind everyone that the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast, and I can imagine there might be some tonight, are ours and do not represent those of our employer. So yeah, there's that. Just a quick reminder: the High Tech Crime Investigation Association conference is coming up in Orlando, Florida. I think it is August 30th through September 2nd, if memory serves right. HTCIAconference.org. And yes, I am woefully behind on issuing the winner of the ticket. I apologize. I'm going to do that tonight. Sorry. But looks like a great conference. Hope to see you there. Moving on to our stories. So the first story, if I can get my web browser pulled up here, is related to the OPM. I mean, what else would it be about, right? So this one comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and it is called OPM Hack, the Role FISMA Played. My one takeaway from this article is that apparently it is super bad if CISOs report to the CIO, and all evil in humanity stems from that fact.
He had more to say than just that.
I missed it if there was more.
Well, first of all, the guy who wrote it is a former CISO in the departments of VA and Energy. So, what I really read is that he was sort of really picking on the Federal Information Security Management Act, the FISMA Act, and how it's trying to shoehorn security into IT as opposed to actually making security any sort of priority or really building any sort of security excellence around what they're doing. And I remember after FISMA passed, not too long, I remember I was working at a Secure World Expo at a booth for some vendor at the time. And I remember a bunch of people coming through who just didn't have an IT vibe at all, and they were asking very basic security questions. And I would ask them, like, who are you, and who do you work for? And they would say, oh, I'm the newly appointed computer security contact for this office of this department. I'm like, oh. And I asked, do you have an IT background? No, I used to be the lead secretary. Since I work with the computers so much, they gave it to me. And I'm like, oh, that's going to work well. And I just remember thinking back then, it's probably much better now, but they would just appoint people and checkbox it. And so a lot of what I read into here, obviously that was just a little anecdotal thing that I experienced, but what I read in here is that he's really picking on FISMA as not building a security program more as it was to pay lip service to the program and not really get proper security done in the federal government.
Yeah, and in fact, he does say, boy, there's an echo. He does go on to say that the CIO role is often a political appointment. And I think that kind of is in line with what you were just saying. And so if you have a political appointee, how good is that political appointee going to be at taking security seriously? But, I guess the skeptic in me says that, what's to make the CISO role not be a political appointee role, even if it were moved out from underneath the CIO? I mean, I'm kind of skeptical about that kind of thing. But I'm not in the ranks, and so this person seems to be a lot more close to it. And he certainly does have a lot of frustration with what he perceives FISMA, the box FISMA apparently is putting the government in, and he actually goes on a rant and describes a hypothetical agency head who thumbs their nose at FISMA in Congress and elevates the CISO role to a direct report to the agency head, and reassigns the business as usual security staff and discharge its contractor masters, and goes on from there. I think I guess, like you said, it's trying to apply a one size fits all methodology, but at the same time, it's when I've been in large organizations, and it's very difficult to get away from a one size fits all kind of model. Not justifying it, just saying it's really hard. We don't have it as a story, by the way, but kind of tangential to the OPM breach story was the big controversy that some of the OPM IT staff were overseas contractors, some of which were in China. And what frustrated me, and maybe it's because I work for an outsourcing company, is that they kind of subtly imply that there's a linkage between the two things, and there's really no evidence. There hasn't been any evidence or any implication that any of the people who were working in their IT department, even those that were contract offshore resources, were in any way, shape, or form responsible or associated with the breach. But it's like hey, China broke into this database. Oh my gosh, they had Chinese people on their IT staff.
Well, all Chinese people work for the government intelligence agencies, don't they?
Well, clearly that must be the case. So now, and there's been a lot of, I don't know if it's manufactured outrage or how to describe it otherwise, but I will say, one of the problems is I don't know that it was, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but as far as I understand it, there wasn't a problem with with foreign nationals accessing this information. And so was it misclassified? I don't know. And so that's kind of one of the lessons I think out of this, the overarching story here is that, it's buyer's remorse, right? Well, we can look back and say, oh my gosh, it's so horrible that we didn't protect this data better, because now we know that the amalgamation of all that data is of paramount importance to the government, because it has apparently the names and affairs and all kinds of nasty stuff about spies living in China, and now our intelligence operations is apparently a big smoking crater because the HR department got compromised and no one really thought that was important.
Well, I wonder if anyone even ever truly asked that question. Really, you look at the abstract layers involved here of outsourcing and contractors and sysadmins and where they are and that sort of stuff. Do you think anyone ever consciously sat down and said, okay, we can go with the Chinese guys, they'll cost us X, or we can go with U.S. people, they'll cost us Y. we'd rather spend X, and we don't think it's that scary for them to access this information, so we're going to go with X? Or do you think it's just one of these things that just momentum and inertia and bureaucracy just carried the day, and no one ever really double-checked? I mean, granted, when you have the classification system, and it says, no foreign entities, that should trigger some sort of review at some point, you would think, but I've never worked in the federal government, so I can only speculate. But I guess what I'm saying is that I don't know that it was that conscious of a decision.
I don't think it was. So I guess, well, there's two sides to that coin. On the one hand, I think the data, part of this stemmed from the what I'm going to controversially call the misclassification of the data, because if it was so damn important to keep so secret, maybe it should have had a higher level of classification. I don't even know if that makes sense or not. Doesn't make sense, but whatever. I think the issue is that, again, when you look at big organizations like this, you have these monolithic policies like data classification that say that you can do this, you can't do that, and then the organizations with that they kind of have to work within the system, and I think there's probably some incentive to find the more economical way to do things. But again, I'll say that, going back to my original point, that I don't think that the fact they outsourced those operations to Brazilian and Chinese people were necessarily the problem. Maybe it was symptomatic of a bigger problem where they weren't paying attention to their IT, which, by the way, I think if you look at the history of their inspector general audits, it sounds like, and by the way, I think that's probably the biggest story in this whole thing that no one's really talking about, is that apparently the inspector general has been writing them up every frickin' year for I don't know how long, and everybody apparently waves, not everybody, but some people wag their finger at OPM and then go about their business, and then, oh my gosh, they got breached. Holy cow.
What were the write-ups about?
I don't have the details, but it sounded like it was a pretty pervasive, some pervasive problems. And I don't know. This is one of those issues where we don't have enough real information to say exactly what happened. We know that the data that was apparently stolen was stored in a 25-year-old system, and apparently it's really hard to encrypt 25-year-old systems, which, by the way, I think is probably true. But,
Well, again, encryption may not have been the panacea. As we said over and over in the show, let's say you're doing file-level row. Let's say it's a database. You're doing, row-level encryption on the database, If someone has valid credentials to come in, it doesn't matter if it's encrypted. The database will happily decrypt it for them. Here you go.
That's right. That's
anyway.
right.
Well, looping this back to the OPM story, one thing he talks about in here is that many agencies are using the, quote, lowest price, technically acceptable, end quote, contractors to protect some of our nation's most important and sensitive data. So, he's even pushing that. They're going for, in essence, the minimum cost with the minimum level of technical capability to do whatever the contract specifies needs to be done. And that is the way that the businesses are purchasing technical contracting.
But isn't that kind of what we expect the government to do, on the one hand? But on the other hand, I would argue the fact that this data was not considered among the most important and sensitive data the government had prior to the breach. I mean, certainly now we're all running around crazy about how sensitive this data was, but I get the sense that was not the prevailing opinion about this data before.
Yeah.
So
I also thought it was interesting that within moments it was China.
Who else could it be?
I guess North Korea is out of vogue.
Yeah. Well, there's always Iran, but
well, I think North Korea filled up all their hard drives with all the Sony data, and they,
Oh, it could be.
I think they had to ask China to do it for 'em. I think North Korea is subcontracting to China.
Well, actually, there was some stories about how allegedly the North Korea cyber army actually was operating in China. So, or is not past tense. Is.
Well, that's because they can get better hot pockets there when they're sitting in their basements hacking.
That's true. That's true. And caffeine probably is not allowed in North Korea, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Anyway, moving on to our next story. Killed that one. This one comes from CSO Online, and the title is "User Error is an Expected Business Problem." What I learned from this article is that CSO Online pays by the word. But aside from that, it's actually I think a pretty good article, though Ira Winkler, the person who wrote this, is the topic of lots of debate, we'll say. I think this is a pretty good point, that in many other industries outside of technology, there's a firm recognition about the limitations of humans, and there's a strong desire and drive and effort to try to mitigate that, and they specifically talk about airlines, which I'm sure you're going to have something to say, and also factory workers. But I was also thinking about like medicine. They probably have similar kinds of things where they try to fight some human related failures or basically mistakes through the use of checklists and workplace designs, as he points out. And I think he makes the claim that at least in the physical world, human error can be reduced by about 90% through redesigning the environment, and then you just have to worry about the remaining 10%. Now in the IT world, I don't know if I think part of the problem is we don't really have good metrics on on that, and that's part of the, I think, the underlying story here is that as an industry we don't do a very good job of kind of figuring out how to best address human error. We see that we got fished, and so we go hire a company to come fish us, and we pay money for a some kind of security awareness training program, and if anything happens net of that, we call them stupid or incompetent or malicious or what have you, and we move on. We don't generally tend to think any more about it. So, and I think his point here is that human errors are not the exception; they're just a fact of life with having human employees. So, what say you?
I think his fundamental point is accurate, that you cannot reduce human error to zero, and that our expectations of our users to not make mistakes is probably a fool's errand. But I think that he's also mixing some very different things together and trying to compare apples to oranges. And I feel like I'm not being very articulate tonight. I blame the cold medicine. Let's see if I can make a little more sense. So, a couple things that came to mind as I read through this article is that we as a field go to these user trainings and whatnot because that's what the vendors are telling us we should do. We're looking for a solution to the problem, and we go research it. And what do we find? We find propaganda from the vendors who put out these videos and other phishing campaigns and that sort of stuff. And so I don't know that we as an industry have a better option being presented to us that we're not going after. And maybe that's what he's arguing, is that we should, be doing more third-party, independent sort of testing. But, he brings up aviation as a place for checklists, and I actually completely agree with him. It makes perfect sense, and I didn't have anything to say negative about that. But there's something, if I compare, all right, just a user going about his day, let's say he's an accountant, and a pilot doing his job and using checklists. Keep in mind that the computer and the things that they're having trouble with are usually secondary for the accountant to the actual accounting, whereas for the pilot, the checklist is in his primary field of aviating. So right now, what we're actually doing is talking about how an accountant, as our test user, is making a mistake and, let's say, falling for a phishing email. And how do you wrap a checklist or training around that when really their primary job function is to do the accounting, much as a pilot's primary job function is to fly the plane? So the other thing that's different is that there's also bad guys actively looking to exploit known weaknesses in human psychology. So for aviation, the problems are fairly static.
It's not an intelligent adversary mucking with your
typically
your
no
plane.
Right? Typically, the NTSB and the FAA, at least within the U.S., can spot trends over time and attack those trends. Now, we develop new trends. We've got some issues right now, at least within aviation, where pilots are getting too transfixed with the new technology in their cockpits and that kind of thing. But in general, we don't have a high evolving threat environment in aviation. Now, to me, it's more like a battlefield environment where you, as one side of the conflict and the other side, are countering and counter-countering and developing new techniques and counter techniques and then counter techniques. That and in that case, it's much more difficult to have a static plan because things change so rapidly. So I don't disagree with his point. And in fact, I've thought about some of this too. I've thought about using checklists and stuff for high error-prone activities and certain IT security functionalities, like creating firewall rules and that sort of stuff. I think there could be some advantage there, and it's something I've kicked around a little bit in my own head. But he's taking dumbing it down a bit. Areas where errors are static in their evolution typically and aren't being opposed by a intelligent adversary, and then comparing to an environment where the environment is changing all the time, errors are changing all the time, we have active adversaries all the time, and it's difficult to compare those two. I know it's a long rambling way to say that, and I apologize, but did that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing that as you were talking, I was envisioning, a checklist every time I go to check an email. Before I open an attachment, I need to go through this checklist, and contrast with the pilot analogy. The pilot goes through the checklist once at the beginning of a flight. Where that's kind of a central focal point, and contrast that with with a person who wants to go through the checklist so he can get to the bathroom.
Right. Technically, especially with airline crews, they've got about 18 checklists. So pre-flight, taxi, takeoff, climb out, cruise, descent. There's a lot of checklists. But yes, I agree with you. Not just the pre-flight checklist. But
fair enough.
I completely agree with you, though, that if you had a checklist to do every tiny little thing in your environment, you would insult your user. You would run up to a lot of other psychology too about delegating people. All the psychology over the years of don't delegate them the how, delegate them the why, and let them figure out how to get there. That kind of thing, right? Where we've tried to empower our users. So you're going to have some other unintended consequences when you start doing those sorts of things.
Yeah. Plus, I think some of this stuff is not really. Doesn't really lend itself to a checklist.
No, I agree. Some aspects do, though.
Yeah. I like your firewall rule. I think that those things like that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, things like creating privileged admin accounts and
right.
High sensitive situations when people get fired or terminated. Checklists there. I think there are areas where checklists and IT make sense. There's one other thing that I wanted to kind of poke at a little bit here. he's talking about carelessness and inattentiveness, and that people having a value for what they're working on. And he uses example, for example, a normal person will be clearly more attentive to holding a baby securely in their arms than they might be holding a sponge. They have a greater sense of responsibility with a baby and are naturally more attentive. Well, the problem with this is that to most human beings, there's an obvious negative consequence to dropping the baby, and there isn't to dropping the sponge. Now, he's trying to say that contrast that to IT, where people should have an obvious understanding of the value of the IT, data they're working with. Well, I would argue they don't. There's no negative consequence to fall for a phishing campaign.
Right. No, exactly.
So there is no psychological impetus to care more about my company's data. In fact, most people are even more flippant about their company data than their own data. So,
which is bad.
Yeah,
which is really bad.
So it's an interesting article, and it makes some interesting points. But I think it's trying to draw some psychological parallels when I don't think it's as simple as it's spelled out to be here at all.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the author is a controversial character. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a good read, worth paying attention to. The next article we have is also a good read, and it comes from Data Breach Today, and the title is Post Malware Outbreak: Rip and Replace ? So I don't recall if we talked about this story or not. I'm getting older and the brain cells aren't working like they used to. But if we haven't, the German parliament, called Bundestag, I guess is how you say it. Sorry if you're German. I'm a terrible person, and I'm sorry. Anyway, the German.
This has nothing to do with your bad pronunciation of German, though.
Well, that's true. That's true. The German parliament recently had a bad malware outbreak.
Is there a good malware outbreak?
I've seen some that I would call good, yes.
Okay, carry on.
But anyway, not often. But anyway, it's a Trojan, the likes of which have not, as far as I know, been publicly disclosed. There's not been a public discussion of exactly what they're fighting with, but there has been a discussion that they're apparently looking at the prospect of replacing all 20,000 PCs and potentially some portion of their server infrastructure as well. And the point of this article was that we can use this as a case in point where it makes sense to integrate your incident response and business continuity plans. Because in certain cases, and by the way, my good friend Bob has been in a number of cases where this sort of thing has happened, where there's been active malware outbreaks, and it's kind of like a whack-a-mole game. You can spend a whole bunch of effort, especially when you have thousands or tens of thousands of PCs. It becomes a really, really difficult game to play. And if the malware is at all intelligent and it morphs over time, and you don't know where it's coming in, this is a very difficult prospect to recover from. And so the point is that you ought to think about, in the context of your business continuity plan, the prospect that you may need to enact a similar type of plan if, let's say, one of your office buildings burned down and many of your people lost their PCs and you lost your data center or what have you. I'll also say, when I was talking with Bob about this, he works at a big company that is very geographically diverse, and they take full advantage of the fact that they are geographically diverse in their business continuity plan. And so they don't feel obligated, or they don't feel disquieted, I guess is the way he would describe it, by some of the normal business continuity and disaster recovery problems that other companies have, because so many people are work at home or in different offices, that the fact that the prospect of any kind of a disaster, like a physical disaster, taking down any significant number of people is really, really unlikely. However, this is a case where you effectively have to respond in the same type of way that you would, with a kinetic kind of business continuity event, but that can happen irrespective of location. And so, if you happen to be one of those companies that thinks like that, this might be something to make you to think a little harder about the implication of just blindly relying on your dispersed nature. But anyway, back on track. It is not unheard of to get to a point in an incident response where you say it's time to burn it down. And I will tell you, I don't have any insight into the environment at the German Parliament, but I'm gonna bet Active Directory is part of it, and I'm gonna bet that they're having a hell of a time cleaning it up. And and when you've got 20,000 PCs in an Active Directory infrastructure, you're talking about the world's worst game of whack-a-mole.
Well, I was thinking too, we're starting to hear more about malware that can hide in things like the GPU firmware and other spots that are persistent across OS reloads. So there might be other reasons to swap out hardware.
Well, certainly as time goes on, and I've said this. I started saying this after stupid Stuxnet came out. But, the thing that scares me most as we go forward is that every damn one of these Kaspersky write-ups or NSA playset or Snowden documents or whatever, it's you got all these criminals saying, that's a really damn good idea. and other countries saying, wow, that's a fantastic idea. And so basically they're raising the state of the art.
You could say the same thing about Tom Clancy books. It's just, they still got to do it.
But it's been done. It's not. Yeah. It's not. I mean, the difference between a Tom Clancy book and
you just want to control ideas, Mister. You don't want information to be free.
No,
you're just a thought police.
I just think we have to be realistic that all of the, not all, right, but much of the R&D that goes into our intelligence apparatus or the intelligence apparatus at different countries is bound to show up in your average organized crime malware someday. And that's my point. So yeah. Fine. Yeah, and which, by the way, kind of goes back to your point, right? I mean, we start getting malware hiding itself in the CPU of your hard drive or your GPU or your BIOS, and incident response. I'm just saying, I'm gonna buy some stock in FireEye.
Well, it's one of those things where we've got to get better at detection of compromise based on anomalous behavior at a very, very high level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, it's a good article. It's a good thought experiment. I think it's a really rare type of scenario. However, we have seen it in Saudi Aramco and in a bunch of companies and organizations in South Korea. We saw it in Sony. We now apparently saw it in the German Parliament. So, it's not epidemic, but it's not unheard of either. So, especially if you're a larger company, it's probably worth thinking about.
And the flip side is, at least fortunately, a lot of commodity PCs are now getting very, very cheap. That it's reasonable from a standpoint of budget to potentially make these disposable.
It's a great
it's
point.
not as bad as it used to be, at least.
It's a great point. And, it's a great opportunity for your operating system refresh.
Yeah, you can finally get off Windows XP.
Yeah. Or you've been meaning to get off of Windows 2003 and move on to 2012. I mean, there's you always want to look for the opportunity in adversity. That's just my...
Never let a crisis go to waste.
That's exactly right.
Man, you are just destined for leadership.
I know.
Just ignore the details and just throw out some platitudes and issue orders and go play golf. You'll be good to go.
That's right. All right, so moving on to our next story, which comes also from CSO Online, and the title is 6 Breaches, Lessons, Reminders, and Potential Ways to Prevent Them. And this article wins the most disorganized article of the night. But it is a good one. And by the way, it's, I think, kind of in line with why we started this podcast. So they do talk about 6 different breaches: the OPM breach, Sally Beauty, Starbucks, Anthem, Adult Friend Finder, and Penn State. But they don't actually talk really nuts and bolts about any of them. They do talk about kind of some of the more interesting things to take away. So I'm not going to go through the enumeration of breach to lesson, but their lessons are that, number one, end users don't protect passwords. That hopefully isn't a big surprise.
I'm shocked.
I know. Number 2, that risk analysis and risk assessments are very important. Number 3 is that...
I do want to comment on the risk analysis too, right?
Because,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
It drives me crazy when I see things like a lot of compliance-driven stuff is not going deep enough in my mind to really assure things. So I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day who was telling me about a company he worked at where, they were doing great in all their compliance stuff. Then somebody decided to do a firewall audit and found that the firewall rules were all jacked up. But hey, we got a firewall, so we're passing the audits. Right, so it's as much as how you run your security tools is more important than that you've got them. So from a risk profile and risk analysis standpoint, if you're not testing, if you're just letting the assumption that, hey, my firewall's there and it's set up properly and everything's great, and you're not testing that, you're probably missing some opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, there's a great quote in here. It's not really a quote, but a sentence. A lesson of great value is for companies to understand the value of risk analysis. In order to build the best defense, organizations need to know where their vulnerabilities are. Investing in tools and programs can be a fool's errand if security administrators are only running through a compliance and regulation checklist without a strategy. Now, that doesn't really go to the depth of what the thought you just conveyed, but it's along the same lines. Absolutely. I think we've both seen cases where, have firewall check and you look inside the firewall and it doesn't really do anything. It's just a router.
Yeah.
That's awesome, but it's a firewall. And it's right there on the network diagram. It's a firewall.
Well, and there's a deeper point here, which is executives at a very, high level, through no real fault of their own, they're forced to look at it that way. They can't get down in the weeds on all of these technologies. They've got to trust that their teams are running these tools properly.
Right. They're assuming that their firewalls are firewalling. Right.
And it's an interesting problem because, okay, let's say let's just play this out. Let's say, we'll go back to the OPM breach and, this isn't the case, but I'll just pick on this for a minute. They found out, your firewall rules sucked. Well, we had a firewall. Well, who's auditing the firewall rules? Well, typically the people who are actually writing the firewall rules are so far removed from the actual executive leadership of IT or IT security. It's an interesting, tough problem. And I think a lot of companies would be better off not buying new shiny boxes and making sure that they're getting the right appropriate controls out of their existing shiny blinky boxes.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, definitely well said. Let's see. So moving on, the next item they pointed out was that you need to know what you're protecting, and they quoted the head of White Hat Security saying that OPM was hacked through a system they didn't know existed. I had not heard that, so I've got.
That was news to me as well, but I will admit that I have, not read all the news reports. So
yeah, but we there's been plenty of examples in the past, Bit9 and many others that were in fact hacked by systems that they didn't know existed. So that's a big concern. And by the way, that's also a big concern I've discussed with some people who who don't necessarily think that the whole asset management thing is that important, right? And this is an example of why it's important, because if you don't know about it, you're probably not protecting it, or nobody is protecting it well. So that's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You absolutely have to know what's in your environment and when things change in your environment.
Yeah.
If new hosts are showing up or new boxes are being deployed, these are things that absolutely you need to know. And I think asset management is a prerequisite to good vulnerability management.
Agreed. He points out Tripwire. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but our former coworker Lamar Bailey was quoted in here.
Oh, I did not notice that.
Yeah.
It was a very oddly formatted article that was
Apparently, Lamar is the director of research at Tripwire.
Good for him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. So, anyway, another point was trying to, I guess, to summarize, short circuit the whole breach issue and short circuit your response to them by using things like Tripwire's and not the company and honey tokens. As a attempt to help measure the effectiveness of your controls, which I think is a good idea. Probably the most interesting thing, and I've saved it for last intentionally, is there's a link to a paper from Google. And I don't remember the exact title of the paper, but it's from their site reliability engineering group. And it describes how Google has moved, or at least is in the process of moving to a perimeterless IT environment. So all of their applications, all of their corporate assets are straight out on the internet. There is no VPN. There is no, nothing like that. They rely on encryption. It's a good paper, right? It invokes a strong gut reaction in some of us, but it's worth a read, because I think it's kind of they're once again shaking things up. So worth reading. New paradigm. Go forth and read it. It's linked in this particular story. So I don't know if you had a chance to read that one, Mr. Kelly.
I've not. I'm curious. I definitely have an initial gut reaction, which is even if you think firewalls suck, it still at least reduces the attack surface against your host. So it seems useful to me to have them.
Yeah. Well, I think the concept behind it is you the safety blanket's taken away, and you have to take everything seriously, and you no longer fall victim to the fallacy that your internal network is secure. Right?
Yeah.
So
I get that. I can understand. There's a part of me that sort of likes that. There's a part of me that also is thinking about, what about lab environments? What about staging environments? What about pre-production, UA environments?
Yeah. Well, since we've all gone to Agile and DevOps, there is no more testing anymore. So
I can't even touch my toes. Don't talk to me about Agile.
Oh boy, yeah. So yeah, let's move on. The final story tonight, I guess, which is the kind of the skateboarding dog story.
Now wait just a damn minute.
All right, go ahead.
Since when do we cover sports ball stories?
Well, since one sports ball company hacked another sports ball company, apparently.
I don't even know you anymore. What's become of this show?
So the story here is that the FBI is investigating the St. Louis Cardinals, who is a Major League Baseball team here in the U.S., for hacking, allegedly, another baseball team, the Houston Astros. And let me tell you what, they used some of the most advanced, persistent threat tactics I've ever seen. So the story goes that an executive who worked for the St. Louis Cardinals for a period of years developed a business. I'll use the business system in air quotes to help. I think it was to help try to figure out what kind of talent they needed and who to go after and things like that. And then, by the way, as far as I understand, I've seen the movie Moneyball, right? And I've read Signal and the Noise, and I know that baseball is all about picking talent, picking new talent. So that's their secret sauce. So this guy left and went to the Houston Astros, and he took a number of people with him. And while he was at the Astros, he built a similar system. So, the next generation talent development or talent identification system, and apparently used the same passwords as the passwords he used while he was employed at the Cardinals. And so the advanced attackers at the Cardinals are alleged to have, because they were apparently very concerned that the Astros had basically stolen Cardinal intellectual property as this guy moved from his former employer to his new employer, that they needed to go and go find out, right? So they found his passwords, and I don't know much about the IT environment of the Houston Astros, but apparently they were able to log in somehow and get into their application, allegedly, and that's kind of where the story goes dark. There's really not a lot more detail than that. However, this is apparently the first case of one major league or one major sports organization hacking, again allegedly, another. So, hey, it's at least it's not credit cards, and there will be no credit monitoring.
But there will be free game balls for all affected employees.
That's true. That is true. So.
Oh my. So I haven't read anywhere what pointed to this other organization and how they got caught.
It hasn't been said as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I didn't know if I just missed it because I will be honest, I don't spend a lot of time reading about sports ball. Now, certain people will yell at me for thinking that I'm being super cool and trendy by dissing on sports ball and, just trying to make my nerd creds look shinier.
So how's that working out for you?
That's pretty much what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, transparency, right?
It comes from being teased by jocks as a child that, you just never truly get over.
Fair enough.
And,
but the thing that concerns me a little bit is, certainly baseball organizations, they're not the largest enterprises in the world, but they're not necessarily small either. And probably more than anything, that is their secret sauce. That is their crown jewel data right there.
Well, what could they possibly have done different here, Jerry? I don't know what you expect of these people.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe use different passwords. I mean, how does that happen?
It's called not being a security guy. Or much worse than that, I guess. Just, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it shows you what can happen, right?
To me, this shows me the power of open source, right? Self-developed code is the bomb.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get some hate mail on that one.
We don't even know if it was open source. This could have been an Access database.
That's true.
It probably was, actually.
That's true.
So anyway, I think that is all the stories we have for tonight. So anything else you'd like to cover, Mr. Callett?
No, I'm gonna go collapse back on the couch and try to get over the last of this bit of flu I've got and be good and chipper for our next show.
Awesome, good deal. Well, as always, thank you very much for listening, and it is quite an honor that we have as many of you out there as we do, and I just don't know what to say. It is.
Well, I say thank you for spending your time with us.
Yeah, definitely. So, with that, if you have any comments or questions, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. I do try to respond to them all. I sometimes, am neglectful, but I will definitely make an attempt. If you like the show, give us some love on iTunes. It helps us get up on the rankings, and we're doing pretty well. So thank you very much for that. Tell a friend. Another great thing you can do for us. You can follow the show on Twitter @DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter @Lurg, me on Twitter @MaliciousLink. You can find the show notes, which include links to the stories we talked about tonight, as well as all of the back episodes, now 119 back episodes, on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. And with that, I bid you adieu for a week, and we will talk to you again next time.
See you guys.
Take care.
Have a good week.
See ya. I've long called it squishy, and I have lots of unpleasant words for it. Taco Bell keeps reminding me of InfoSec. So I was at Taco Bell the other day, and I ordered a bunch of stuff, but I ordered 2 orders of nachos and cheese, and they handed me the food on the tray, and I said, and I got the 2 cups of cheese, but only 1 package of nachos.
Oh.
And I said, well, I'm missing a nachos. And the lady at the counter calls back, did you put 2 packages of nachos on the tray? Yeah, I did. I'm like, look down at the tray.
Right.
Count the nachos.
Way to f***ing communicate.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.